Would help if I started the recording.
All right, so this morning we are on the second part of the Way Up is Down, the parables at a feast, from Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. Now, I'm going to move back here just a little bit. Next Sunday is going to be a little odd for us in that I have to leave at 9:30. Next week, Scout Sunday, all the scouts are going to be here, the troops and the packs and the crew. And so I will have to cut out at 9:30 to get them wrangled to start the service. So we'll start next week and get as far as we can in our lesson. All right, so for those that weren't here, we're going to go back and go ahead and read our passage again. Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. It says, on the Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, which of you, having a son or an ox, has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? And they could not reply to these things. Now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited both of you will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when the host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He also said to the man who invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest also they invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. All right, we made it as far as purpose and application, but before we get into that, since we have just read the text again, any observations, thoughts, or questions? I actually had several last week and had good discussion last week. Anybody? All right. Well, when we get into it, purpose and application in these teachings, Jesus appears to be addressing two separate audiences. The host of the dinner and those who pick the places of honor. So he's talking to multiple groups in this passage. The last part is about those who ought to be invited to such a dinner. It almost sounds like an afterthought. However, the paragraph has a very close relationship to the whole theme. Jesus may have noticed that the host invited only those who were people of honor or importance to the host. None was there who was needy or to whom this invitation would have been an unusually great honor. So Jesus addresses this portion of the teaching to the host. I see parallels to the guy who had the feast and everybody made excuses and didn't want to show up. You know, those excuses, justified or not, as I said in that one, I think the only one that was maybe justified was the guy that got married. But even that one, you'd think you've had enough foreknowledge of what's coming up to be prepared for it.
I have a question on this one. You've got down here, Jesus may have noticed that the host invited those who were, What about the guy who had dropsy?
He left.
You know, I don't know. And I don't know how he fits into the equation.
Because he was,
He's there, and so my question is, and this is one that I don't know the answer to. Did he just show up outside the door because he knew Jesus was there? Or is he one of those honored guests?
But if he had an affliction, why would he be invited? Because wasn't he unclean then?
I don't know if dropsy is necessarily a condition that would make you unclean. You know, say like leprosy would. Because if I understand dropsy correctly, I mean it's a neurological issue that you can't, it's not contagious. You can't pass it on to somebody else.
She invited us to sign up.
Well, that may be an idea too. Invited as a setup.
Or maybe he was a servant.
Or he could have been a servant. Yeah. There's really, we don't know how the guy with dropsy got to the party. We just know that he's there.
And then he sent him on his way.
Yeah, here, you're healed. Go do it. And sending him on his way does not necessarily mean
Yeah, he left.
out the door and he left. It's now go do whatever it was that you were doing. Whether he was a servant, whether he was a guest, whether he was, just showing up at the door saying, help me. Whichever position he happens to fall in, he's going back to doing whatever it was that he was doing before he was healed by Jesus. Anybody else? Thoughts, comments, or questions?
I don't know, this is the one of the parables that strikes me as also would have fit easily into Proverbs.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, we get stuck on, everybody seems to want their 15 minutes of fame. Mm-hmm. And we get stuck on being the in crowd. Our society is obsessed with it. I want to be a social media influencer. I hear kids say that, and I'm like, you want a what? Social media influencer? What the heck? Oh, you want to be one of those people on social media that has like 5 million followers and you're famous just for being famous. But you add absolutely nothing of value to society.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And I think this is a warning against that type of, some people look at great wealth and position as a right, Well, I was born into this is my family, when in reality, it's a responsibility, taking into play to who has been given much is expected and required. And I think sometimes they miss that. And that's why it goes back and forth here with if you're throwing a party like this, don't invite your rich friends, because then they're going to feel obligated to invite you back, and it's just going to be this back and forth, and your circle is going to be too narrow. In the church sometimes we draw our circle extremely small, and you look at the circle that Jesus drew, it was rather large. And so I think this is a cautionary tale. Did you?
I think of being a guest.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever gone to a wedding where, first of all, you had to decide where you're going to sit, or they're all place cards and you're like, oh no.
Who am I going to sit
with?
Yep.
It's all nervousness. If you put yourself last, then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Yep. No, I've been to a few of those weddings, officiated a few of those weddings, where when you get to the reception, there's a place card with your name on it, and you have no choice as to who you sit next to.
That's right.
But really, when you look at it, how many of us, regardless of where we fit in the, if you want to call it the social structure, caste system, whatever you want to call it, how many of us invite people we don't know to our get-togethers? Not very often. Oh, if it's at the church, the community is always welcome. But this isn't taking place at the church or the synagogue. This is taking place in the person's home. I look at that and it's kind of like, awkward. Because we don't. I mean, I look at it, at least in my family, which my side of the family, I think I have one sibling that's outgoing and the rest are reserved. I'm an extrovert when I need to be, but it's not my nature to be an extrovert. And it's just like, I could not see my family doing that, you know, because they don't like big groups. I mean, heck, they have a hard enough time getting together just as a family. That crowd is overwhelming at times, let alone bringing somebody else new in. So I think part of it too is this challenges perspectives on things and how we do things. There's a great lesson here to be learned in regard to hospitality. Certainly we're not wrong to invite those we know and love, but Jesus is teaching that this shouldn't be the sole focus of our hospitality. We should willingly reach out to those who are less fortunate than we are. Isn't it significant that Jesus' focus in many of his teachings are on the poor, maimed, blind, and crippled? Yeah, indeed it is. Because those are the people, especially in this society, in the first century, they're worse than we are, you know. They didn't have the ADA. They didn't have laws that were designed specifically to put them on an equal playing field with others. If you had a disease, or if you were lame, or if you were poor, you were a dreg of society.
Beggar.
Yeah, beggar. Yep, absolutely. And so Jesus casts his lot with these guys, and it really freaks everybody out, especially the Pharisees. Now, Jesus wasn't, for the most part, Jesus wasn't highborn. Yes, he was a descendant of David, but by the time you get to Jesus, how many generations have passed since David? A lot. And you know what happens? The further you get away from the individual, the wider that pool becomes. So, yes, Jesus was a descendant of David, but so were probably 200,000 other people in Israel at the time. So, yeah, I'm a descendant of King David. Join the club, brother. You know, not that it's unimportant, but in that day and age, it wouldn't have been something that anybody really would have given a second thought to. But Jesus was recognized, much like John the Baptist was, as this prophetic voice, as this teacher, as this healer, even this exorcist, you know, driving out demons and evil spirits, and recognized as a rabbi. So that brings him up to a higher level. Even though he's not in the highest echelons of society, he's higher than the poor. And so the highest level of society would look at him and go, you're working your way up. Why are you lowering yourself to be with these people? And what's Jesus' response to them? Why aren't you? I remember when I was in college, there was a guy who spent a lot of time on campus. His dad worked for the school. And to say that he was an outcast in most situations would be an understatement. This was the guy who, more than anything, wanted to belong, but he had a very caustic, off-putting personality. He and I became friends. Now, I will admit, there were times that I wanted to reach out and smack him upside the head. But I remember one evening in particular, he'd come by the door. And we'd watched a movie, and he was not in a good place at that point in time. Was having a rough run of it. And was just complaining about everything. And that, you know, that in itself will wear on you after a while. But I remember after he left, you know, hope I was a little encouraging to him. And after he left, one of the guys there in the dorm came up and was like, Jim, why do you hang out with him? And I just looked at him, and it caught me. I don't know if it caught me wrong or it caught me right, depending on how you read my response. But my response was simply, what kind of question is that? You ask me why I hang out with him, why don't you? Needless to say, that shut him up. I don't know if it changed his direction or his, if that changed his mindset any. But it definitely changed his physical direction as he just turned around and walked away.
Sometimes when you get to know people that at first take,
Yeah.
they're really out there.
Yep.
Different,
Oh.
odd. You get to know them and you find out.
Oh, yeah.
They're really
Yeah.
special.
I have a couple of friends that I will be honest, and they know this, that when we first met, I didn't like you. First, second, even third impression was not that good. But yeah, you spend time with people over time. I mean, this guy, to this day, we're still good friends. And, and I will look at it. He's been a blessing to my life. I mean, he traveled with me when I'd go and preach in these little country churches out in the middle of the nowhere, and it was nice to not have to go by yourself. And, distance and time separates you. But I still talk to him on occasion. Not as much as I used to when I was not married and living in the dorms, but, no, people change over time, and often our first impressions are not always correct. And I think Jesus may be getting at this here, going, you reject these people out of hand because of the position they have in society. What does that say about you? Because it says more about you than it says about them. Theodore Roosevelt once invited Booker T. Washington to the White House for dinner. And the next day, all of the newspapers in D.C. were up in arms that the President of the United States would dare to invite a black man to the White House for anything. You know what TR's response was? I bet you can only guess. I'll invite him to dinner anytime I dang well please. But in that day and age, even though it's post-Civil War, even in the North, black people are looked down on. And in that situation it was, I'll have him over to dinner anytime I dang well please. Good. That should be our perspective. Do we make it a point to spend time with the least of these? In years past, we've taken the youth group on work projects. We've gone to the inner city mission. When I was out in Idaho, we had multiple outreaches where we had meals and gave away clothes. In fact, one year we did it on Christmas morning. 10 o'clock. Like, hey, it's 10 o'clock. Gives you time to get up with your family, open your presents, have breakfast. But then you come in and you do something, We did that on Christmas morning. Like 50 people show up that didn't have a place to go on Christmas. And we had a clothing giveaway, and there was a couple of guys there. It's like, you know what, thank you for this. We've got job interviews this week and didn't really have anything to wear. Sky's the limit. How does it happen? How is irrelevant. It can look like anything. That it happens is the issue. Jesus teaches that the only way up in the kingdom is down. Choose the lowly seats, and you may be asked to move up to the honorable space. We should always seek to be servants first, John chapter 13, verses 1 through 17. We are to be people of the towel. It is necessary for us to be servants in order to gain the Lord's attention. Jesus was prophesied to be the suffering servant. He came not to be ministered to, but to minister to others. He reminds us that no servant is greater than his master, nor is the messenger greater than the one who sent him. I look at this, someone put this out on Facebook. Oh, it's been several years ago. And a lot of times it gets shared during the Easter season. on the day before his death, Jesus knew that he was going to die. And what did he do? He washed feet. Now, if that doesn't make you think, I mean, the question's often asked, if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, what would you do today? Sky's the limit. And the answer to that, is as different as the person. But Jesus knew. Jesus knew the exact minute he was going to die. And still, gathered with his disciples, he wraps the towel around his waist, gets down, and he washes their feet.
We had foot washing services at the church that I grew up in, Church of God.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very touching. They were very poignant to be a part of. You humbled yourself.
Yeah.
Even though it was all your friends. I was always the youngest one because it was always the older ladies.
Yeah. Yep.
But I still remember that.
Yeah.
I remember who washed my feet.
Yep. And you said Church of God. Now, in that position, that would have been one of the church's ordinances.
Yes.
Because see, some churches view that as an ordinance along with baptism, the Lord's and the Lord's Supper. Honestly, I think the church, and I say the church, we as the church, should participate in that from time to time. We did it when I was in college. We went to a small enough school that the entire student body was broke up into family groups. And those family groups were led by faculty and staff. So, like, my family group was led by the college vice president and one of the employees in the physical plant. Basically, he was one of the janitors. And that was those were our family group leaders. And 2 or 3 times a year, you would have family chapel. So instead of going into the gym and having full chapel, you did it as a family group. And there were a few occasions where that's what we did. And it was. I mean, even though these are your peers, well, some of them anyway, definitely humbling, to sit down in the chair and have the vice president of the college wash your feet. That wasn't lost on the 19-year-old Jim who's trying to figure out this Jesus thing, even though I was raised in the church, because we'd never done it. The entire time I was a kid growing up, we talked about it. It was the Sunday school lesson flannel graph back in those days, but we never did it. And it is because that's the worst thing. I have ugly feet. I have really ugly, I don't want people looking at my feet.
That's why it's humbling.
It is. It is, because for most people, maybe not everybody, but for most people, their feet are the ugliest part of their body. And so, yeah. Huh? Yeah, well, and I think that's the other part of it. Well, in the first century, you walk into somebody's house, you kick your sandals off, what's the first thing that happens? A servant is there washing your feet, and they don't have the option. So I think that's probably why Jesus makes as big a deal about it as he does, because it's something that purposely makes us uncomfortable. I mean, heck, I remember coming back from my internship, and all of us interns that had spent the previous 3.5 months in the far-flung regions of the world, and we're coming together for debriefing for 4 days. And they had all of us line up on the sidewalk outside the main building where we were meeting and take our shoes off. Because they weren't going to wash our feet, they were going to record our feet. I don't know what was worse, having somebody touch my feet or take pictures of it. Why? Well, what's the Bible verse? How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And I'm like, the message may be beautiful. I'm not buying the feet part of it. The only way up is down. So does that make an ulterior motive on our part? False humility. Does it exist? Often as Christians, we're accused of having an ulterior motive. You know, we do a food bank. Well, you've got an ulterior motive. My response to that is, you're right, I do. And that ulterior motive is, I don't want you to go to hell. Seems like a pretty justified ulterior motive to me. But can you have the ulterior motive when it comes to the place you pick at the table? Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but me personally, I don't want to sit at the head table. I'm uncomfortable sitting at the head table. I'd be the one that, I would say I'd rather sit at the end table, but at the same time, actually, I think I'd rather be in the kitchen. You know, eating in the kitchen with the cooks. I've never been one to want the attention for anything.
You'd actually be getting out of your comfort zone sitting at the head.
Absolutely. And there are times, primarily because of what I do here, there are times that when I'm out in public, I tend to be the person up front. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I like being the person that's not up front. This last year, I was one of the assistant course directors for adult training for scouts called Wood Badge. And just like regular scouts, there's a religious aspect to it because we have services out there with our participants. And the course director asked me, well, you're the preacher. Do you want to be responsible for the, take on overseeing the religious aspects of stuff? And I said, no. And he's like, really? I said, yeah. I said, spiritual development is what I do 24/7. You've asked me to be the quartermaster. That means I'm responsible for all the meals. I want to just stick to that. Let somebody else have that opportunity. I get it all the time. And after it was over, I was like, I think I understand now. I said, exactly. You don't always want to be the person, and you don't always have to be the person up front. And in this, those are the people we want to be the people up front. We want that place of honor. James and John. I don't know if Mommy did it on her own, or if James and John elbowed "Oh Mother Dearest" to go talk to Jesus. Can my sons have the position next to you in heaven? One on the left and one on the right. And what's Jesus say? Lady, I don't even know who's getting those seats. To paraphrase it, I don't even know who's getting those seats. I've said for the longest time, those seats are going to go to people that are like, the church janitor. Or not even a church janitor in school. This person that you never see unless you need something. But yet they're there, behind the scenes, pouring themselves into the lives of other people. The people that we would least expect are going to be the ones that are sitting next to Jesus. If I read the text right, to be exalted, one needs to be humbled. E.W. McMillan, and I love this, humiliation always precedes exaltation. We cannot and will not be great by extolling our own virtues. I often wonder, and the text is escaping me, I often wonder what in the world made Moses write of himself that he was the most humble man that ever lived. I mean, it's kind of like John slipping into third person. The disciple that Jesus loved outran the other one. I mean, you can sense the competition between John and Peter in that one. The disciple that Jesus loved outran the other one. A bit prideful, do you think? But honestly, I think we have texts like that in the Bible just to prove that the people that God used to write His Word were themselves human. That they were in there for a purpose. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up. False humility exists, just like cheap grace exists. Cheap grace, I'm saved by the grace of God, ergo I can do whatever I want now. Or, I really want the place of honor, but I'm going to take this lower place just so I can be given the higher place. Humility needs to be real, not feigned. Because the person throwing the party sees you sitting in the lowest place and chooses to move you up a few spaces. He can't read your heart. He can just read your actions. Oh, Jesus can read both of them.
Now, I have a hard time occasionally because I have a hard time waiting. Okay? There's a group of people in the gym, and it's time to eat.
Yeah.
Nobody will do it. Everybody's waiting. It's like, so I take the lead. I do it.
Yeah.
I say, we're going to do this.
Yep.
So I go ahead.
Yeah.
Because I can't stand it when nobody does that.
Yeah. Well, and there you're filling a gap that needs to be filled. You know, so in that situation, it's like somebody's got to get this thing started.
Somebody's gotta lead.
Yeah. Yep. Especially if you're on a time schedule,
Yeah.
because it's like,
I'm on.
yeah. Well, I'm one of those. I'd rather be a half an hour early than 5 minutes late. But yeah, when you're sitting there going, and some things are more time sensitive than others. But yes, there are times where, yeah, no, I see that one all day long, and it does happen. And I think on that you're more fulfilling the need. Dealing with the life lessons out of this. When I compare myself with Christ, I see just how terrible and wretched I truly am. One of the reasons Jesus speaks the way that he does to the Pharisees is he could read their hearts. They're rotten to the core, spiritually speaking, and the sad thing is they don't even know it. I think in a lot of situations, they have lived the way they live so long that they can't tell the difference. It's kind of like a habitual liar. You ever known somebody that lies even when they don't need to? And I think those people that lie even when they don't need to, I don't even know if they realize they're lying in all those situations, because they have done it so long and to such an extent and degree that it is natural to them. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like... We don't use the word wretch anymore. It's a nasty word. But it's true. I always have the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And my first response is, where in the world do we get this crazy, stupid idea that we're good? Now, I'm not a Calvinist. I don't think we're born sinners. But once we sin, we become sinners. And that separates us from God, and that does make us the wretch. Such a statement can be made by all who honestly assess themselves in relation to Christ. When we view ourselves, when we view our reflection in the mirror of Scripture, what we see is not good. If there is anything good about it, is that Jesus loves us, not because of what we do, but in spite of what we do, in spite of who we are. As Paul writes, while we were still sinners, while we were still in open rebellion against God, Christ died for us. The Son of God forsook all that he had to become the servant of mankind and died the most humiliating death one can experience and he did it all for me. He was not concerned during his life on earth with how important he was. In fact, here's one of the crazy things about it. How many times in Jesus' ministry, I haven't counted this up, probably should. How many times did Jesus heal somebody and then look at them and go, don't tell anybody. Don't say anything about it. Now, part of it's a timing issue, I believe, that the timeline of what Jesus is doing is laid out in his mind. It's like, don't tell anybody because I'm not ready for what's coming next.
But human nature, you tell a kid not to do it, what are they going to do? So
Oh, yeah.
I've always wondered about that. It says, don't say anything. But to me, I'm thinking human nature.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to go tell.
Well, and the ones that Jesus told that to, some of them did go and tell. It's like, what do you mean this great thing happened? Of course I have to testify about it. Oh, yeah. Telling a little kid not to say something? Well, good luck. It's like, don't even go there. Jesus was the epitome of the man with the towel. He gave all that he might redeem all. So, what lessons do we learn from it? We should be greatly humbled when we look at the self-sacrificing Savior. Even the strongest person among us is woefully weak, both physically and spiritually. We are all people who have turned our eyes and ears away from God. We are mired in moral weakness and failure. There is no way out except through the cross of Christ. No other way. Now, we live in a culture mired and blinded by subjectivity. Live your truth. You do you. What's right for you may not be right for me, and what's right for me may not be right for you. And we embrace stupidity. Not ignorance, stupidity. We want to be told what to do. Oftentimes, I think we find comfort in being told what to do. But the stupidity comes into play when we don't evaluate the source of those directions. If God is telling us to do something, reputable source you need to listen to. Most reputable source you need to listen to. But if some teeny bopper social media influencer is telling you to go do something, you're probably going to want to think twice about it. Because it could not only be hurtful, it could just be downright stupid. And the outcome for you, or for those around you, might not be positive. And don't think you can fall into a trap from somebody that has evil intentions. Think again. Over the course of the last year, I read a book called The Nuremberg Interviews. It was written by one of the primary psychiatrists that took part in the Nuremberg trials. And these psychiatrists were sent in to interview the defendants, these architects of war and mass murder, to try to find something that set them apart from everybody else. And after all the interviews, you know what was discovered at the end of the day? There was no psychological defects in these people. They were just evil. It was, this could have been anybody. In fact, one of the psychiatrists was so shaken by the fact that there was nothing that separated these people from normal everyday people, that he eventually took his own life, trying to wrap his head around why people do what they do. God is the only thing that can change us. We all have the propensity for evil, and that propensity for evil can be shallow, or it can be deeper than the pits of hell. That's why we're always warned, stay on guard. Thoughts, comments, observations before we wrap it up? All right, well, we'll stop with that this morning. We'll let everybody in, and we should have just enough to finish next week. All right, let me turn my video off, and I'll answer it, or try to.